Okay, so Mr. Popvich, please tell us how you stepped into the music business.
Well, I grew up at a great time in the last century. To age myself, I grew up basically in the 50s when rock and roll was just starting out. We heard it for the first time on the radio. We were all influenced as early teenagers by Elvis and the Sun Records explosion, and Fats Domino, the sounds coming out of New Orleans, and a lot of the black music coming out of New York and LA. Those were major influences on kids who were growing up in what were really coal mine towns in southwestern Pennsylvania. I grew up 60 miles south of Pittsburgh. My father was a coal miner, and he had a Yugoslavian folk music band. And myself and 3 or 4 other fellows were taught to play tamburica music, which is Yugoslavian folk music, by this Yugoslavian priest who came to our house every Thursday. So that background, coupled with the music of rock that we were hearing, and then out of Pittsburgh came some of the greatest records of the 50s with a group called the Skyliners, Since I Don't Have You, the Dell Vikings, Come Go With Me, all very influential. And the makeup, the radio makeup of Pennsylvania at that time was very domineering, dominant part of the country for new music. So we grew up with that, and I played in a polka rock and roll band throughout high school. And my father died my senior year in high school, and we had insurance was $2,000, a funeral was $1,500. We had $500 to our name. My sister, my mother, and I moved to Cleveland, Ohio, which is where her family lived. And I went to 1 year of college there, and my band came up from Pennsylvania, and we started playing all over Cleveland as a rock and roll band, and we did quite well. And in 1962, I read that Columbia Records was opening a warehouse in Cleveland, and I called America's Polka King, who I grew up listening to back in the coal fields, a guy named Frank Yankovic. I called him. He was in the hospital with a back injury. He had been in a car accident. I called him and asked him if he could make a call and get me an interview for that job, and he did that, not knowing who I was. And he called the branch manager there, and I went over, got the interview, and started working in a warehouse for $30 a week in '62.
So that's how you started.
I started there, and I stayed with them from '62 to '69. I went through a number of jobs there. One was the inventory control, sales to retail stores, and then radio promotion. And Cleveland was a real breakout market at that time, and one of the major reasons the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is there is because of what happened back in radio there in the 50s with an Alan Freed who started out there, and with the Moondog Show. A guy named Bill Randall, who was the first to break Elvis Presley, the Everly Brothers, north of the Mason-Dixon line. So Cleveland had always been a great breakout, what they call a breakout market. What happened in Cleveland would influence the rest of the country. So, I mean, we grew up in the record business, blessed to be in the right place at the right time. Frank started there from Pittsburgh. He came up to Cleveland, and a lot of us grew up together in the music business. Started in that warehouse and doing local promotion in Cleveland. And we also had some regional television shows. One was called Upbeat, where every act in the business, regardless of what label they were on, were brought in there every Saturday. I mean, Otis Redding's last gig was playing the Upbeat show, and my friends took him to the airport. His next show was in Madison, Wisconsin, when his plane crashed going in to do that last show. But everybody from Simon and Garfunkel to Paul Revere and the Raiders, who were real big at that time, came in and did the show. And the radio responded. When they came in to do the TV show, we took most of those acts out to the local radio stations, and they were interviewed and on the air. So many records that went on to national prominence broke out of Cleveland, Ohio.
So after that, you moved to New York.
In 1969, we had just broken through an act called Blood, Sweat, and Tears. The drummer, Bobby Columbi, went to New York and told Clive Davis about this hot stuff promotion man that Columbia Records had in Cleveland. And also a friend of mine who was my boss at the time, Ron Alexenberg, became the head of promotion at Columbia. So those two things created a situation where I was interviewed to become Ron Alexenberg's assistant as the head of promotion at Columbia, which I was kind of didn't want to take. I mean, I was just married at the time, had just gotten out of the Army, and told my wife to go to her mother's house while I turned the job down. So Ron called me, and after an hour, I took the job. She came back home. I says, well, we're going to take this job, with the understanding that if I went to New York and I didn't like it after a year, I could come back and have my regular local job in Cleveland. And so I did that, and it was probably the smartest thing I've ever done. It was a great time in the music business. It was great working with Clive Davis and Ron Alexenberg, and we had a field regional and local promotion staff of about 30 people. And the company, through the early 70s, called itself the Music People. And we really believed we were the music people. I mean, we'd have conventions in different parts of the country every year, an annual convention from LA down to San Juan, Puerto Rico. My first convention was in San Juan. 1970, I believe it was. The opening show was a group called Spirit, followed by the Chambers Brothers, followed by Blood, Sweat and Tears, followed by Janis Joplin, Big Brother and the Holding Company were the headliners. So it was a great time for somebody in their early 20s to be in the position I was in. I learned a lot. For my 1 year of college, I got a kind of what I've always felt was a master's degree in the music business, working with Clive Davis, Ron Alexenberg, Frank DeLeo, people like that. You know, we were a team.
And then you became vice president at Columbia.
Right, Ron moved on to Epic Records in, I believe it was 72, and I became the first vice president of promotion at Columbia. And at that time, we were like the #1 label in the business, with Dylan, Simon & Garfunkel, Santana, people like that, Joplin, and a lot of jazz acts. Miles Davis had Bitches Brew, that was happening. Our classical roster was a really in-depth roster. In middle of the road, we had people like Andy Williams, Percy Faith, Ray Conniff, Tony Bennett, who's still around today, Johnny Mathis. And a guy named Goddard Lieberson was there, who was one of the founding fathers at Columbia Records, who was a good record man from the standpoint that he could relate to Johnny Cash, who was on our label. You could have breakfast with him in Nashville, have lunch with Leonard Bernstein, and hang out with Mahalia Jackson for dinner. I mean, he was all things to all people. And we all emulated that and learned from him, you know. And other promotion people that Frank and I learned from, a guy called Granny White, who was the first black promotion man in the music business. Started in the 40s sweeping the warehouse floor in Chicago, I believe it was, with Columbia Records, who taught all of us guys who went on to become promotion men and became fairly well known in what we did. He was kind of a teacher. We learned a lot from the man on how to deal with all types of people. You know, colors didn't matter to him. He could go to a country radio station, a black station, a top 40 station, a jazz station, and go to all the accounts and then hang out with a polka star at night. I mean, he was all things to all people. And I think that kind of was a good mindset for most of us. We all had very open minds, I think, as the music people.
Okay, so that time you were working as A&R.
No, at that, well, you know what? Every promotion man thinks he's an A&R man. You know, we all drive people nuts who do A&R with our single recommendations and what we think, because we're dealing with radio every day. They're dealing with the consumer every day. Those are very important opinions that are being filtered through us to the A&R people. And as Frank mentioned earlier, I mean, a lot of the Michael success was what he picked up on his own. It just instinctively, because of knowing the marketplace and understanding that marketplace, you know. It's very critical, and I think it's critical today, even with all the technology. people who understand and who listen to other people, you know, and cultivate everyone's ideas and come out with a decision on something. I think that's very important today, you know.
Okay, so how did you get the deal? How did you get the deal with Jackson 5?
Well, after doing promotion, I was the Billboard Promotion Man of the Year 2 years in a row, in 72 and 73.
Wait. One of the things that he did that made him attractive to move to Epic and would make him attractive to the Jacksons was all the bands that he did. You should cover the fact that not only did he do Blood, Sweat, and Tears, he did Chicago, he did Janis Joplin, he did Santana, Bruce Springsteen. Okay. If it wasn't for him, Bruce Springsteen would have been cut 30 years ago, you know. So there's this whole element in his knowledge that made them bring him to Epic, and then that attracts people like the Jacksons. So kind of do it that way.
Well, you know, Frank's right. The thing is, in whatever you do in this business, and I think it holds true today, one thing that Frank has that I think I have, and people like Clive Davis have, is you have to be stubbornly passionate in your beliefs. You can listen to and get everyone's opinions and everything else, but in the end, you're on the line. Your beliefs are on the line. And no one that I've experienced in this business will, usually you'll play something new to them and they won't get it. And they'll tell you reasons why it's not going to happen. I've always been of the opinion of why can't it happen? If it's something that you love, and if you truly love music, and if music is your life, which is a phrase we all used in the 70s, it was our life. We sacrificed a lot in those days. We slept in our offices. We were on the phones at 3 a.m. calling radio. All of us did that because we were committed to our cause. And our cause was the music people and making Columbia Records and CBS the #1 entertainment company in the world. And we always felt we were. So that, you know, in those days, we were in our 20s again, not Harvard or Yale educated in business schools, but we dealt from the heart. And we did this because we loved music. We didn't get in this business for money. None of us. You know, I mean, we started at $30 a week, and we were blessed, we thought, when we made $100 a week because we worked for 80 hours and got overtime, you know. So all that having been said, in 1974, Clive had by that time left the company and gone on to start his company of Arista. We weren't, a lot of us weren't thrilled at the way he was dismissed there. We really believed in everything that he stood for and what the company stood for at that time. We weren't thrilled that he was dismissed at that time. And it was kind of one of the reasons why 4 or 5 years later, I left the company, because I knew at corporations, you can't be 40 years old and be in charge of counting paper clips. You know, it's not gratifying, it's not fulfilling. So, you know, in 1974, Ron had an opening as vice president of A&R. And since we had a lot of success together on the Columbia side, and he had a challenge to bring Epic Records into the modern age of music. They were a folky label. They had a number of English artists who were great. Jeff Beck, who's still around today and doing, you know, amazing. The Hollies, Bobby Vinton was a middle of the road artist. So he offered me the job to come up and join him as VP of A&R. And we sat down at dinner one night and discussed what we wanted to do. We wanted to build a great musical staff who was aware of what was happening worldwide in music. And we felt one of the areas we really needed to concentrate on was the black area, which was a big problem CBS had always overall. We were never known as a black record company. The only act that when Frank and I started out there was Aretha Franklin and Miles Davis from a jazz standpoint. And O.C. Smith had a song called Little Green Apples. And then Earth, Wind and Fire came along. And that was our first at Columbia, our first venture into a major superstar act. We had a group called the Manhattans. Well, back to the Epic situation, we wanted to do the same at Epic. So we had Minnie Riperton at the time, and we had LaBelle with Lady Marmalade and Lovin' You with Minnie. And about that time, we decided to go into R&B and rock. Lo and behold comes a Joe Tex with a song called Ain't Gonna Bump No More with No Big Fat Woman that did 1.5 million records. And the album did 1 million units. We had Boston, who came in through, I had a great A&R staff at that time of people who were out all over the country listening to new bands and going to clubs. In that process came Cheap Trick from Madison, Wisconsin, a club band. A group from Boston called Boston who did a demo in their basement, and a guy named Lenny Peachy heard it, brought it into us, and we ended up signing them. And we had, Wild Cherry with a record called Play That Funky Music out of Ohio. We had a number of things out of Europe, a band from Denmark called Gasoline that was really good. David Essex, Rock On from England, had been a #1 record. And the one good thing that happened was the image started to turn around. And one day, Ron calls me and says, look, there's some folks here I want you to meet. I'm gonna bring them over to your office. And he walks in with a guy named Pete Bennett, who was a major league promotion man at that period of like 75, 76. Along with Joe Jackson, and Joe Jackson's partner named Richard Aarons, I believe the fellow's name was. And we sat down with them, and they had obviously a lot of success with the Jacksons, and Joe, as Joe explained at that time, they had a lot of success at Motown, a lot of single record sales, and Motown was a very domineering company that went from R&B records to crossing over pop with just about everyone, and they were a worldwide influence. You go to England, everyone knew who their acts were. But they felt that we could do a much better job distribution-wise, because we were a worldwide distributor. Motown was what they called in those days an independent. They were the label, but they didn't own all their distribution. They had all independents in the major cities around the country here, and in the foreign countries, they had licensees. So they didn't have as much control as we did, because we owned all of our branches and we owned our distribution around the world. And we sat down and it took a few months of meetings and negotiations, and it finally came to fruition. We had a press conference in New York and announced the signing of the Jacksons. Prior to that, Ron and I had taken Walter Yetnikoff, who was the president of CBS Records at that time, to see them at the Westbury Music Festival, I believe it was. It was a 3,000-seat theater in the Round on Long Island near Ron's house. And Ron also had the Jacksons to his home for a big party before the show where Walter could meet him and we could all chat and so forth. Our families could meet. It was a very, very nice evening, and we took Walter to the show, and he wasn't knocked out by it. He told both of us he didn't think we could do a big job with these guys. And Ron and I both spoke up, and it's no secret, it's in his book, Walter's book, where we said, Walter, you know what, you're not in your job long enough to even qualify to judge this. We know the history of the Jacksons, we know the hits they've had, the singles they've sold, and with our distribution, we think we can do a much better job. So let us do this. And he did. And, the rest became history years later, of course, Those first sessions we did were with a guy named Bobby Taylor from a group Motown had called Bobby Taylor and the Vancouvers, who had a number of R&B hits, and he was a very well-respected producer-songwriter at Motown. And he did the first sessions, I remember, meeting Michael at the house in Encino, and they had their studio there. And the first 7 or 8 tracks I was just listening to last week, and they're wonderful. I mean, it was Michael when he was like 15 years old probably, and as the head of A&R, I thought it was very important to like broaden his perspective and you know, through a number of things we did. But one of my favorite acts that I worked with at Columbia and continued a relationship with was a guy named Boz Scaggs. And Boz had written a song that I thought would be perfect for Michael called "We're All Alone." And then another favorite was Felix Cavallari from the Rascals. They had a hit called "People Gotta Be Free." And it was my feeling at the time that people always have to be free, and it's not a song or an issue that gets dated. So they cut those two songs as well as 5 or 6 other songs that the group had written, you know. And it's wonderful to listen to today and how far the whole thing progressed, the whole Jackson empire progressed since that time, you know. I remember taking Michael and his bodyguard, I guess would be the word at the time, and Randy, his brother, to see Boz Scaggs play at the Roxy Theater in Hollywood here, you know. And going backstage afterward, and Boz, of course, was very courteous, and they got along great, you know. And I have my photo of that moment to treasure, you know. But I left Epic, you know, in 1976 to start my own company, and was blessed to have an act called Meatloaf that everybody had turned down at that time. And we had CBS distribution, now Sony worldwide. And so, you know, I'm 67 years old now, and I look back and I'm very proud of, those are two of my proudest moments, were the involvement, excuse me, in signing Michael with Ron and the Meatloaf project, which is, I mean, Thriller, which I had nothing to do with, is at 100 million plus, you know, and it's certainly been a $1 billion profit center for Sony. Meatloaf's at 43 million, and that's another huge profit center. And in some polls, the number 1 and 3 albums in history, I had something to do with, and I'm proud of that as someone looking back on a legacy and a career, you know, for my grandkids to know about, you know, so. I don't know if that answered your question. But
Yeah, you pretty much covered everything.
I think, yeah, I just, I don't know.
他にありますか? And then, a couple more things about Michael Jackson. When was the first time?
Well, you know what?
Met him?
One thing that I do remember, after I left there, Gamble and Huff produced the very first album, the Jacksons, it was called. And I think Blues Away is one of the songs on it. It came from the original demo session that we had done, you know, or that Bobby had done. And then I was busy with my own Cleveland International thing, but I always stayed in touch with Frank because I think he took over Epic Promotion in '79, and we had always stayed friends and in touch and everything. And he kept me up to date on what was happening with a lot of the situations at CBS. And one of the things that he was so proud of was this whole thing with Michael and what was going on with the first release, when they really started to break through under Frank's leadership of the promotion department. And it was a vindication because we were criticized pretty heavily, you know, for signing the Jacksons, you know. And to see something that you believed in and then you weren't around then for the coming out party, so to speak, but you feel vindicated that your decision was the right decision, you know. And you always try to make A&R decisions based on whether or not the best part of any artist's career is behind them or ahead of them. That's something that Clive Davis pounded into our heads. And it's something that we felt at that time. I mean, at the ages they were, certainly the best part of their career was way ahead of them, was what Ron and I felt, you know. That's a matter of the chemistry, you know. And again, you know, when you deal with an artist today, and I think the same thing holds true, you have to have a belief that can't be, your beliefs can't be changed. You have to be stubbornly passionate, because first you have to find something that's special. You have to find one of the great songs. I mean, the songs, as everyone knows, are the keys to this whole ball game. If you have a great songwriter, that's very, very key. There's millions of singers, there's millions of guitar players. There aren't lots of great songwriters, you know? And that's what these guys evolved to. Michael especially became a brilliant songwriter. and he had a pulse on the world of what the youth of the world thought and what was going through their minds, regardless of what country they were from. Youth are the same all over the world, you know. People are the same all over the world. The leaders aren't the same all over the world, is the problem, you know. But seeing the thing that when Frank left Epic to go and manage Michael was, I thought, brilliant for his career, because the experience he brought to that party, being a promotion man, being a salesman, being a record guy, and a music guy, and stubbornly passionate, is what Michael needed at that time. And it always needed through his career. And I think he got that from Frank. And it's funny, but Frank was down in Durham, North Carolina when Michael fired him. I remember very clearly speaking to Frank that day, because I wanted him to go down and take care of himself, because he was so involved that Michael was his priority and Frank kind of was taken second, health-wise, a back seat, I thought. And I recommended a health place for him to go to in North Carolina, and Frank went down there, and that's when Michael called to fire him, I believe, you know. Which was ironic, because that wasn't a smart move, but it was a necessary move, I guess, he thought, you know.
So both you and Frank, Mr. Frank DeLeo, so, well, you said you have to be strong, stubbornly passionate.
You have to be stubbornly passionate, because you've got to cross.
But you still have to have some kind of account to, the aspect to count on, because you can't gamble, you know. You have to.
Yes,
see
you do. It is a gamble.
What did you see in Michael Jackson or Jackson 5 talent?
Well, Helen Keller could see what anyone saw in I mean, here is a gifted child prodigy who was on some of the greatest single recordings of the last century that Jackson 5 made at Motown. I mean, I Want You Back, stuff like that. I mean, my 8-year-old and 10-year-old grandsons love those records. They have multi-generational appeal. Most Motown songs speak the language of the heart. Berry Gordy was a genius from the standpoint that he had songwriters, he had producers, he had musicians, he had artists. Those artists all were trained. They went to school. They learned how to dance. They learned choreography. It was a genius move on his part, what he taught those people. Because these were people who grew up like we did, in the coal fields and in the ghettos. We had no polish. He polished those stars. The Diana Ross and the Supremes, polished people. They could converse with the Queen of England when they were through with them. I mean, that was just very, very clever, very smart, and I don't think any company's ever duplicated that. That training. There was a Motown school that these acts had to go to, you know. So, I mean, back when we signed them, they were looking to sell more records and everything, but it wasn't like they were a brand new group. They were a very well-known group, you know. And hey, look, what was it? 5 years later, the era of the media superstar with Michael. And you know, there are critical times, I'm sure, in the life of that record where people told Frank he was crazy. Stop, no. You got to keep saying no, and here's why. And you got to give reasons why. And you need to come up with new toys, new vision. Americans didn't discover videos. Europe's always had videos, and I'm sure Asia's always had them. They always had television shows that included videos. That's how they broke acts in those countries. We never knew that in America until MTV came along. Most of our videos, Meatloaf's video of Paradise by the Dashboard Light came out in Holland and sold nothing. But in a year, they did a Dutch translation of the video with Dutch subtitles, and it exploded to 700,000 records. That's how important videos are, and that's how important persistence is when you believe you have something, you know.
So, looking back to the signing of the contract, how did you get the deal of signing Jackson 5?
How did we get it? The deal was negotiated. I don't remember the details of the money involved, But as is true with most deals, our legal department lawyers got together with their representatives and worked out a deal on paper, which was basically, a guarantee, a 7-year contract, maybe a 1-year contract with 7 1-year options. Would have been the deal. And we had this press conference, in New York to announce it. And we, of course, could not use the Jackson 5 name. So we had to use the Jacksons. Motown had sued us at that time. Their lawyers quizzed me. I mean, we went through a whole thing with Motown on that, on our signing the Jacksons. So, but eventually it all worked out,
So how did it start? How come they moved to Epic? How come, why Jackson 5?
They had belief in the company, that the company could sell great numbers of records at a time when they wanted to go to the next level of stardom, and we had branches around the world, and we discussed. I remember, discussing that with them, the advantages we as a company had at that particular time.
So they came to you.
Oh yes, no doubt about that. Through Pete Bennett's auspices, brought him into Ron's office, and we met with him after that. And then there were a number of meetings with Joe and Richard Aarons out here in Los Angeles that I had, just going over what direction we wanted to take and who producers should be. And Ron was on the phone to Gamble and Huff, who were very hot at that time with Philly International and, the OJ's 3 Degrees, and Harold Melvin and Blue Notes and others, So producers are very key to the whole process, as are obviously the songwriters, But I think one of the great nights too was when Frank had him play at those 7 nights at Wembley Stadium. That was like unbelievable. I mean, 75,000 people going nuts on their feet for 2.5 hours. And it was a magic show. Certainly in my list of the 10 greatest shows I've seen in my career, I was lucky to have been a witness to all that, from Elvis to the Beatles in Cleveland in 1962, to Springsteen to Michael at Wembley. So those are great times, great moments.
So same question. In recent years, a lot of things have been changed in the music industry because of, due to the changes in the formats, or, changes in the infrastructure. So, what do you think it happened, or
Well, a number of things have happened. I know that right now technology this year should be catching up. I saw some figures the other day where $3.5 billion in digital sales will be this year, which will surpass the 3.4 billion of CD sales. This is the first year that digital is going to surpass the actual hard product, Having said that, I do think that there are certain things that never change. Greatness in songs, greatness in artists, American Idol, for what it is a necessary thing. I don't agree with a lot of the judging, a lot of the statements, but it has made way for a pretty amazing career for this woman, Susan Boyle, who has sold 7 million CDs. When everyone's saying that CD sales are over, Susan Boyle has sold 7 million, never touring, never played a stadium, just on television, and on television worldwide again. A media star. And not where Frank and I live in Nashville. I mean, the rules are you got to be under 30, you have to be pretty, you have to have a look, your hair's got to be a certain way. They skip Susan Boyle on all those things, and she's still a superstar, certified by any country in the world. I think that's a pretty amazing thing, and that, I think, goes back to the belief that it's still something from the heart, that you have something in you that touches people. And when you get that going, that's what Michael had, I think. That's what Meatloaf had. There are a lot more people in the world that weighed 300 pounds at the time we had Meatloaf 30 years ago than looked like Peter Frampton. You know, all the high school outcasts who weighed 300 pounds, he was their idol in the world, you know, so.
Yeah, so as one of the...
And it takes the heart out of it. Frank and I were talking about that the other day. The personal touch is very important still in this business. It always was back then. Relationships, the digitalization of the world has kind of taken the personal touch out of a lot of things. You know, the human element is still vitally important, I think, you know. So.
Yeah, so I think I was...
そのロンさんの流れちょっと出てきてるんですけど、
はい。
ロンさんの彼とか、
Do you have any episode with Mr. Ron Alexenberg when you were working?
Well, we had many. We had a lot of
Yeah,
fun.
so do you have any like interesting episode?
Well, you know, I'm not a good public speaker at all, so, I mean, you know, my great fear, and Ron always loved doing that, you know. And so at these conventions that we'd go to, every night would have a show, and every night would be a different MC, and sometimes it'd be Goddard Lieberson, brilliant man. Clive Davis, brilliant man. Ron Luxemburg, pretty adequate speaker. He made me do it one night, and was like, no, I can't do this, you know. I get scared of big crowds. No, I'll write everything down. So he says, okay, since you're so associated with Chicago, just you bring him out on stage at the convention. It was at the Century Plaza here in LA. He calls me out of one of the promotion meetings that we had at the hotel. He buys me this strawberry suit to wear. You know, here I am walking around in a red suit, you know, white shirt and tie. And I come out on stage and the place is all, you know, yeah, they're teasing me. And I go, and now, please welcome the group. They named the city after Chicago. And I look and nothing. And then for 10 minutes there was nothing, you know, so. We salvaged it. They finally came out and played, but they weren't ready to go on, and I prematurely announced them. So it was a pretty embarrassing moment for them, thanks to my dear friend Ron, you know. But we did a lot of hours together and had a lot of good times and a lot of sad times together. You know, we've had, you know, different tragedies in the family or in the company with losing friends and all, you know. But he's been very good to me.
So can you tell us what's like the difference between how to operate the company or how to operate the organize the strategy? How can I say, like in the old days?
Very
nowadays,
simple.
you know, a lot of datas and
Yeah. Market research.
the researches. Yeah.
We
involved
always
in the
felt
old
our
days.
market research was the consumer. You know, and when you were able to track the sale of a record, if you're a salesman in Cleveland, you sell an account a record. Radio goes on at that day. The next day, the account sells out of the record. Market research is done in my book. You know, that's our market research. When you sell all the music you have. You know, now everything is too technical, and everybody's being trained to be data specific. You know, and there's too much tweeting and too much of the, you know, everything. And I mean, we lived without cell phones. We had a nice life before cell phones. We had a nice life before the internet. I love the Amish people who don't pick up on any of those things. They don't drive cars. They drive horse and buggies. No televisions in their homes. I'm too spoiled to do that. I do admire it though. You know, we've become so technical that we've kind of lost the soul of the business, I think. And that's kind of what American Idol brings back in a way, actually. This Simon Cowell's a pretty colorful character, you know? And the fact that he would even let a Susan Boyle recognize the fact that this woman has something special, I think that's brilliant. That's genius. You know? When everybody's got to be, you know, Taylor Swift, you know, or Carrie Underwood. I mean, this youth movement going on. There's still hundreds of millions of people who love, you know, one of the great things we had at Epic was Tom Jones, Engelbert Humperdinck, and Gilbert O'Sullivan. Their manager called me one day, Gordon Mills. He says, are you interested in those three acts? I said, no, I don't think so. Which was a stupid remark on my part. He says, you know what, you're wrong, and I'm going to come over and show you why you're wrong. I said, be my guest. So he comes over with a stack of, in those days, we called them tab runs, of sales those three guys had all over the world. And I said, you know what? Say no more. Let's do the deal. And that's what it's about. When you have people who can sell in every country in the world, and these people play stadiums, who am I to say you're not relative to today's music business? You know, in our first song with Engelbert Humperdinck was a song called After the Lovin', which sold 1 million albums and 1 million singles. And then we found a song for Tom Jones called Say You'll Stay Until Tomorrow, another 1 million selling single and a platinum album. And it was a very inexpensive deal for CBS to do at the time, you know. And that was 30 years ago, and they laughed at us for signing, by the way. I'll never forget, we played After the Lovin', everybody stood down, they were embarrassed to have it on the label. You know, but you fight those things when you do what Frank does, when you do what I do. You have to, you pay attention to what the public wants and people want, not what record executives want, you know. So, and of those three, they were excited about Gilbert O'Sullivan, who was the only one we didn't have a hit with, you know. But Tom and Engelbert made a lot of money for CBS.
So what do you think where the music industry will go with Michael Jackson?
You know what, who knows, but it's a pretty interesting ride that's going on right now, where you have, you know, Guitar Hero, Rock Band, I mean, all this new technology. You know, there'll be a Thriller Rock Band game, I'm sure. There'll be a Thriller movie, I'm sure. There'll be a history of Michael Jackson movie. There'll be a history of Philly International Records. You know, all these new technologies that are evolving and developing all kind of merge together, and I think there's a bright future for people who are talented, who are gifted, you know. And it certainly has brought into the business, Rock Band and Guitar Hero, I mean, a lot of 8, 9, 10-year-old kids who want to be drummers, who want to be guitar players, who are hearing In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida and loving it. I mean, a 40-year-old song, you know. The Beatles game out there. So, you know, the key is being discovered now, not living off the fat of the land. I mean, if you don't get on American Idol, you got a tough way to go. You know, Susan Boyle without American Idol would have not ever made it, I don't think, under today's rules. American Idol's got their own rules, and I kind of really like that. I like that. Or it's what's in your heart rather than how you look, or, you know. I mean, that girl opened her voice. I don't know if you saw when she appeared on there. It was like the first 10 seconds, the audience was going nuts to her, you know.